early 60s, is look at what has happening with AI right now, right? And one of the challenges with AI is the amount of power that it consumes, right?
Right.
And we haven't solved the problem yet, but a lot of people are talking about, well, why don't we put these very power heavy, power hungry data centers up in space?
Leaders Talk, Season 2.
Hello, everybody, and welcome. Welcome back. It's your favorite time of the week. It's my favorite time of the week. It's time for Leaders Talk. And as always, I am your intrepid host, Andrew Dupy, head of communications here at Leaders Brands. And today with me, I have somebody I'm probably going to nerd out on for about 25 minutes. And it is Ross Hamilton. Ross is a technology leader. He's a board advisor. He's an entrepreneur whose career spans more than 3 decades across financial services, emerging tech, and in the commercial space industry. He's currently the chief operating officer of Space Network, and he works on the commercialization of the global space sector, helping translate complex technological ideas into practical, scalable services that benefit everyone. And so his book that we're here to talk about today is Everything is Flying. And it stems from a frustration that space is often portrayed as either too technical or too abstract. It's too disconnected from daily life. And Ross aims to kind of bridge that gap, explaining how space technologies works, their history, their importance, without equations, jargon, and spectacle. Even though I wouldn't mind some of that myself, but he writes for curious readers using history, engineering insights, and real world examples to show how satellite orbits, power systems, sensors quietly shape our modern world. His goal is not to predict the future, but to help our readers understand the present a lot more clearly. So, Ross, that kind of just
Nailed it.
scratches the surface, though, because I've been looking into you and taking a look at your book, and man, you've got some interesting things to say, and you've got some interesting experiences from Rolls-Royce and various others. So maybe fill in a couple of the gaps for our audience, kind of tell them a little more about you.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me on. You pretty much nailed the premise of the book. There's probably a few things I want to kind of cover off on, but just by way of background, originally from Scotland, I was educated as an aeronautical engineer, and I was destined to go into the aerospace industry. Rolls-Royce aero engine sponsored me through university, and then my career path took a little fork at that point. Ended up working at JP Morgan in London, and I found myself in New York 30 years ago. So most of my career has actually been in finance, building institutional trading systems and capital markets, dealing with a lot of technologies, also
Yeah.
dealing with a lot of startups as well. And a number of years ago, I got involved in helping not just Scottish companies, but other companies. But I did a lot of work with Scottish tech companies and helping them think about how do they grow businesses, right? How do they commercialize? How do they go to market? And that kind of put me between the investor space and the tech space. So
Yeah.
and customer space. So how do technology companies think about raising capital? How do they sell to customers? How do they think about talent? How do they think about their organizations? And throughout that whole thing, there was a thread that really came to me, even from my days on the factory floors of Rolls-Royce, where I'm dealing with people with all kinds of skills that I had no clue about, all the way through these fintech companies and running big organizations. It was always about the people, being able to relate to people, being able to kind of bring people together, work as a team. And that's been a big theme of my career. And over the last couple of years, kind of full circle, I've ended up coming back into the kind of the space business, and our company, Space Network, very, as you mentioned, very much focused on the commercialization of space, which we can talk about what that means. But at the end of the day, it is about helping space technology
Right.
companies become businesses. And again, it's about the people. But I think the misnomer, I think, as you alluded to, is that space, if there's this bar that people seem to have that it's just for the astrophysicists and the aero engineers and whatnot, but actually it needs a lot more people to run these businesses. We need the marketing people, we need the accountants, we need the lawyers, we need the policymakers, we need the creative people, we need the electricians, we need the builders, we need people who are just that would be in any other business, be part of the space business. And so the thinking was behind the book was how do we make space more accessible to people? How do we explain that there's lots of roles for lots of people in this growing industry? And how do we lower the barrier to entry? How do we
Yeah.
inspire students? How do we inspire, young professionals or even older people who are just space curious? How do we give them access to all of this stuff? And so that was kind of the premise of the book. Um, but I'm sure we'll talk about it. That took me on a number of interesting paths, in actually putting something like this together.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and that's kind of fascinating. You mentioned that you took a segue into business. That seems very helpful considering the modern state of what the space industry is now, because we have moved finally within the last 20 years away from space being something that's entirely government organization controlled, that with only money coming from state sponsored space agencies. And now we are finally starting to understand that that model can't really be sustained, and to actually let space grow to the point
Right.
that it needs to grow to begin to actually give tangible benefits to the world, right?
Yeah, and I think there's a few things that might open a few eyes. When you think about, and you're right, it's definitely been state sponsored, NASA sponsored, even SpaceX. A lot of
Right.
came doing stuff for NASA, right, or European Space Agency. Um, but we're at this pivotal point now. If you look at what happened with Artemis, and putting people around the moon as they've just done, NASA's position is we're about space exploration. We're about going to the moon, setting up, getting ourselves ready to go to Mars and go beyond, right? What that means is what NASA used to do in low Earth orbit in the space station, that is now going to be the domain of commercial companies, right?
Mm.
And so with the space station being replaced with number of commercial platforms, right? NASA is going to become the customer and other people are going to become customers of this commercial infrastructure that's going to happen around low Earth orbit. And so that's going to spawn all kinds of, different parts of a new infrastructure that runs the world.
Right.
Uh, and so, and the other thing that's kind of surprising when you really think about it, fast forward, I don't know, 5, 10 years, who are the customers of the space industry? Sure, governments, national security, national defense, big thing, right? It's actually non-space industries.
Mm.
It's financial markets, it's insurance, it's agriculture, it's global supply, logistics companies, you name it. Those are the customers because there's things that we do in space that help people back on Earth. And the exciting part about commercializing the space industry isn't just about shooting rockets up, right? Which is cool.
Mm.
There's
Yeah.
no doubt that it's
Yeah.
cool.
Trust me, I had Artemis on live feed
Yeah.
for the
And
entire time it was up there.
I'm not wanting to minimize how awesome these
Yeah, no, no,
rockets
yeah.
are, but they are a taxi service. It's like SpaceX is like an Uber to space.
Hmm.
I've got something I need to get up there. How do I get up there? Well, I book my spot on SpaceX. And so, and that will continue, just to be clear. But the whole point is people want to put things up there. And what do they
Right.
do? And that's the whole point is what is going on up there? How does it work? Why does it matter? How does it affect us? And this is just the beginning.
Right. In that there's a historical precedent for that as well. When explorers go out, initially their whole job is to explore. They find new areas, find new places, find new resources to exploit. But then comes after the building of the infrastructure, the building of things that then can begin to make money. I mean, the
Right.
commercialization of the Northern Hemisphere was like that. What did we bring? We brought in tobacco colonies. We brought in colonies that produce things, and of course, to do that, you had to have logistics. You had to have back and forth.
Right.
You had to have an infrastructure that was created than to support people that were there. So, it's definitely something that I think that we can understand from a historical perspective is something that works and can be very profitable, and that's how you build new
Yeah.
worlds, essentially. Yeah.
The interesting example that's quite often cited is Jeff Bezos, when he was starting off Amazon, he said he could not have built that company without either the internet or the US mail service.
Yeah, perfect example. Yeah.
Those were pieces of infrastructure that someone else built,
Hmm.
right? Now, government involvement, of course, federal government involvement, but at the end of the day, that was the rails on which Amazon built itself. What's going on right now up in orbit is the new infrastructure for the world economy. And so whoever's putting the satellites up, whoever's putting data centers, whoever's putting all kinds of crazy things up there, that's becoming a platform for future businesses.
Hmm.
And to be fair, Jeff Bezos, I think, has said this. That's actually one of the goals of what Amazon Leo is trying to do now. They've got a project, where they're trying to really put some infrastructure up there. Think about their cloud compute that's on Earth.
Hmm.
Think about that stuff up in space. You know what I'm
Right.
saying? So there's definitely, you know, generations of waves that you see. But the interesting thing I thought was when I went back to say, well, how do I explain rockets and how do I explain some of this stuff? I had to actually rewind centuries to really
Yeah.
understand what's going on. I myself had an intuition about what I wanted to write about because I did aeronautical engineering. I understand thermodynamics and fluid mechanics and aerodynamics and calculus and stuff like that, right? But how did we actually get here? What was the journey that we took? And I thought was interesting with the book was I went really far back in the end, like Aristotle type stuff,
Mhm.
and you walk forward about, think about it. You mentioned explorers, right?
Mhm.
The old explorers, they were fine navigating by the stars. That was great for latitude, right? That was brilliant, and they were very, 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 very good at that. But how did they manage longitude? How did they manage that? And so, what's a really interesting tidbit was way back, right, hundreds of years ago, the British government decided, to put a competition out for how do we solve longitude. And there was a carpenter, John Harrison, decided that he's going to build a chronometer, what you and I would call a watch nowadays, right? But a marine chronometer, so that you could keep time as you go around the world. And at a certain point, or at 12 o'clock, you know where the sun is above you and you know the time, you can figure out where you are going around the world, right? That actually allowed the British Navy, the British Empire to become so dominant because they could rendezvous at specific points at specific times around the world. And so
Right.
that's a major, it's a watch, but that was a major innovation. And the interesting thing about that I thought, which ties back to modern day, is that's a timing device. Your GPS, most people think of GPS as being location devices, sure, integrated with maps and whatnot.
Yeah.
GPSs are actually timing devices. So think about tracing that all the way back. It's kind of cool to think that, it's using time to find your way around the world. And that's actually what these satellites are doing. They've got atomic clocks on them. And when you wake up in the morning and you look at your watch or your phone's like talking to three or four satellites at once.
Mhm.
And it knows where it is because of timing signals. And so this premise of like, how does this work? It actually comes back to just some simple fundamental maths and science and physics.
Yeah. And that's just it. I mean, that's what's interesting about this is people may mislook at this as saying, oh, well, all of space exploration, not as exploration, but space exploitation, I would guess you would say from commercial standpoint, is new, but it's not. I mean, we've been working with communication satellites, with spy satellites, with all kinds of different kind of satellites to the point where we take them for granted now in our world, yet all of that is the first steps of the budding infrastructure that makes
So,
space super important to us.
right. And if you want to bring it right up to modern day, And you're absolutely right. It's been decades of, these satellites being up there because satellites go all the way back to the 60s, right?
Right.
Um, early 60s is look at what has happening with AI right now, right? And one of the challenges with AI is the amount of power that it consumes, right?
Right.
And we haven't solved the problem yet, but a whole lot of people are talking about, well, why don't we put these very power heavy, power hungry data centers up in space? It's much colder. Super, semiconductors work much better at a colder temperature if you can offload the heat. There's a lot of solar power up there. Um, and so you see things like, what Elon's been doing with solar panels and batteries, and it all connects back to the sun and power and, temperature differences. And
Right.
so AI dentist data centers, when they start happening, they're going to be massive. That's going to be in a competitive edge for someone.
Yeah, no, I can see that. I mean, it's already a thing that people are talking about massively, both good and ill. I mean, I'm sure that the zoning commissions will be very happy with them being in space from Alabama.
Well,
You
I
read
mean,
the news.
the problem is, and again, we talk about this in the book, the problem is this idea of space debris. There's thousands and thousands
Yeah,
of satellites. There's thousands and thousands of bits and pieces of broken, smashed up satellites flying around. I don't know if people understand, but satellites and all the debris that's flying around the Earth, right? They're doing over 17,000 miles an hour. You know how fast that is? That's
yeah,
it's great. It's 25 times the speed of sound. It's like a tiny fleck of paint. A little bolt, a little screw would go through anything at that speed. I don't know if
right.
you've seen the movie Gravity?
Yes, yeah, exactly. The
You know that
micro
contagion effect?
microparticles are like bullets. Yeah,
Well, I mean, we're not quite at that point, but this is a real concern. And there's a lot of people around the world concerned about space sustainability. There's other words for it, but the idea is that we're basically keeping our orbit clean. Um, and so, although there's all this opportunity, there's actually a lot of responsibility to allow us to actually use this shared space because no one country owns it, right?
right,
So you can think about geopolitical things with this. There's the good and the bad. And the good is collaboration and some amazing stuff that happens, and maybe the not so good. There can be some geopolitical tensions up there.
right. Yeah.
So it's
Well,
it's a fascinating domain.
yeah, I mean that brings us back to kind of your point that you rose a little bit in the book and you spoke about earlier that how do we start getting people into the industry that can solve these issues that may not be, aeronautical engineers that may have skill sets that they don't necessarily know really space is looking for it right now because that's the key is the people like you said we need to bring in people that aren't rocket scientists, for lack of a better word, that can work these problems of maybe somebody that isn't an aeronautical engineer comes up with an idea to help with
Yeah,
space sustainability, and
I
that, that
think
that's kind of the interesting thing I think.
there's one thing we talk about. We talk about this idea of the rise of space lawyers. But
Yeah,
it's not just lawyers, there's policymakers, politicians, industrialists. There's a wide band of people with different backgrounds that need to come together. And a lot of these things are not solved. There are, outer space treaties that are, kind of set the framework, but things have moved on from, when some of these things were signed. And there's a lot of work to be done on that policy and security and law kind of domain. But then just back to the point is to be creative and to be innovative and to be able to sell your solutions to customers. Again, your customers not being other space companies, outside the industry, requires a lot of creativity and a shift in mindset. And I'll be honest, with you, one of my observations and probably a criticism of many space tech companies is that they're just not commercial enough.
yeah.
Amazing tech people, amazing clever people, but you know, getting them ready for investors or getting them ready for customers, that's a different skill set.
Right. Well, and I think just from my outside observations as someone who's just a space and flight nerd has been that the first real generation of truly commercial businesses have concentrated maybe almost too much on the exploration side of things. They've been trying to look at, we want to, they've looked at commercialization like, okay, maybe we can send some people up, to spend money. I think that was Richard Branson's original idea. It was purely flights where he's going
Space
to
tourism.
monetize it by just having people pay for it. That's not sustainable. Is
No,
a
but
real
but but I mean things like space tourism. I mean, I think Blue Origin's kind of backed off from this a little bit as well. But I mean,
yeah.
that's for the rich, and I think I think there's this thing where a lot of people think, well, space is for like the rich and the famous, right?
Right.
Billionaires playground. I mean, there's an element of that, but if you actually look at what you know how many experiments the International Space Station does a year? They do hundreds, and over the time they've done
Right.
thousands and thousands of experiments. Maybe people don't realize that some of the scientific breakthroughs that are happening in space are fundamental to life on Earth.
Mhm.
So I'll give you an example, and we talk about this again in the book in terms of what actually happens in microgravity. Is it because there's lower gravity, things like protein cells and crystals grow differently. And what that allows scientists to do is to look at, their natural condition, what do protein structures actually look like? How do crystals actually grow? And what that allows us to do is to actually create new drugs and new therapies for things like cancer, for things like Alzheimer's. And so the pharmaceutical industry is really interested in this kind of research because it will allow us to find new causes that you could not do on Earth because of the much stronger gravity. So there's actually um, 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 a budding industry around these
Mhm.
flying test labs, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and that's what's fascinating is that so much of what's going on right now, with the space experimentation, as it can grow, as we, they're talking about a moon base, they're talking about, the things that we can do on that are going to be incredible. New space stations that are commercial. I mean, we could really turn this into something that actually massively benefits Earth, even far more than we're doing it right now.
And one of the things we cover in the book is like there's all kinds of innovations and inventions and materials that have been developed for space that are used back on Earth. Everything from like special carbon products, titanium. The very first drill on the moon. The first guys that went landed on the moon in 1969. Working with Black and Decker to create a cordless drill. Because guess what?
Yeah,
They didn't have an extension cord up there, right? It's cordless. That's the first cordless drill was, Armstrong and those guys, right? Right there you go, right? I mean, I'm sure they're a little bit better now, but and there's lots of materials and there's lots of things that we've done that help the medical industry, create micro devices, you create things that can deal in extreme, in extreme environments. So that's that the kind of part of the idea is to show that sure it's exploration, it's surviving in space, which is extreme heat and radiation and some bad
yeah,
stuff
yeah.
that goes on, but ultimately the solutions that are being created have a purpose back on Earth.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and I love that you're bringing attention to that because I think that's what's needed to be done is that because we constantly hear the refrain when people talk about, or, politicians are politicians. And when they talk about space programs, a lot of them say, why do we need this? Why do we want this? We should concentrate on things on Earth. We should concentrate on our backyard, let's slash budgets. Let's, not worry about it. When really we're making some real strides.
Yeah. I mean,
Um,
I think the thing that's probably speaks more to the politicians is when you get into things like national security, national defense. But think about global logistics. Financial markets, all of these financial transactions are like, time stamped by satellites now, by atomic clocks that are flying around the world. It is part of our infrastructure. And so you actually have to take it seriously. If that stuff goes down, it impacts markets.
oh yeah.
It impacts global logistics. It impacts, let's just be honest, there's a military component to this. There is. And so there's what's called dual use. So, civilian and military. Um, that stuff has to be taken very, very seriously.
Yeah, no, I mean, absolutely. Well, Ross, I would love to talk about this for about 10 more hours, but as we're kind of winding down on time, we're gonna have to have you back on because I've only touched the tip of the iceberg on this. But let's leave our audience something with something like a golden nugget, something that maybe they can take away from this that you really just want them to understand before they go out and pick up the book.
Yeah, I think it's actually, in my mind, it's quite simple. Is space is for all of us,
Hmm.
and we all benefit from it. And particularly, I think for the younger generations who are thinking about careers, who are thinking about what their future opportunities are, let's make space something that's accessible for them. Because maybe there's a whole future for them in new businesses that can be driven off this new infrastructure.
Well, Ross, how can our audience find out more about you?
So everything about the book and me is on the book companion website, everythingisflying.com. There's stuff about the book, the entire timeline that we run through on the histories there. There's some background on the book. There's further reading out there. And there's obviously links to go and buy the book, which is available both on ebook and in hardback at the moment. And hopefully, I keep getting asked about it, hopefully an audio book. But
Yeah, I would love to sit around and listen to this one. But I think I'm going to pick this one up because this is right up my alley. I forgot to go and grab my Space Shuttle Discovery and replace
uh,
my F-80,
you don't have
F-86 with,
but you don't have
but
one
it's
of
okay.
you don't have one of these. You can't probably see that. You don't have one of these on your bookshelf. You need to get one.
I will definitely grab one. Well, Ross, we're going to have you back on. I think that let's give the book some time to get out there and maybe take another look at this in a few months and see how things have gone and have some more nerdy conversations. But I
Love
loved
it.
having you, and we appreciate it, and hopefully that everything's going to be good. Ladies and gentlemen, those links are down below. Give a buy, click on that. Fascinating stuff.
Can I just say one last thing? A big
Absolutely.
thank you.
Go.
Leaders Brands, you guys were awesome. Um, you know, I thought I had a manuscript that was pretty good. I thought I was close, but I'm telling you, the editing, the copy setting, the guidance, the publishing, the design of the book, Leaders Brands, you guys were great partners for me.
Thank you, Ross. We appreciate that. That's what we try to do. That's what I love to hear. Well, Ross, again, thank you and have a great one.
Okay, thanks, Andrew. Take care.